Welcome, everybody, to Reserve Seating. We are joined by a very special guest this week for our first week of June's Playtation. He's looking around, and the joke's on him because he's the very special guest. It's Mr. Scott Drebit. How you doing, Scott?
How's it going, guys?
It's going good.
Good.
So
Good.
our audience is introduced to you, Scott. Scott's a very good friend of the show. He's a very good friend of F This Movie. He is somebody that I met in person at a Flashback Weekend convention, and he's like the biggest mensch ever. So I'm happy to have him back. He's such a nice guy. He is a contributor to the Daily Dead horror news and review website, along with Heather Wixon and Jonathan James, Derek Anderson, who you might all know. And he's the author of a new book called A Cut Below, a celebration of B horror movies.
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me, Adam.
Yeah,
I always think back to that great hang that we had in
it was
at the
good stuff.
convention there. It was good stuff, and I hope we get to do that again. And Rob, been following you for quite a
Wait,
while now,
you
and
following me?
always I no literally following you. Yeah, you should be afraid.
So we are going to talk about the Hunchback of the Morgue, and it is starring Paul Naschy for Paul Naschy Day at F This Movie for June's Exploitation. This was my first Paul Naschy experience. I was telling Rob before we started recording that my only knowledge of Paul Naschy was because of Scream Factory box sets.
Yeah.
And also, he was sort of a gatekeeping topic of choice among older horror nerds that I knew, where they would shame you for not knowing who Paul Naschy was.
Wait. You're telling me the horror community can engage in gatekeeping from time to time?
I'm coming at Naschy the same way. The only difference being is that I certainly wasn't a gatekeeper, and she'd take me out back, paw, behind the shed, if I ever become one. But with Naschy, he was always one of those figures in when I would read books from the libraries, reference books, whatnot. There would always be a section on European horror, and he was always mentioned, which is great, you know. So he's always had his stuff has always been floating out there. But I was the same way, you know, until you get into the Blu-ray age and the boutiques. No one's going to know Naschy in the general, you know, especially if you're just getting into horror and maybe aren't sure where to look. But everything now is becoming so available and all that. But I'm the same way. This is my 7 years ago. I did a review of this movie, a Drive and Dust Off, and I said it's my first of, I'm sure, many. And so far, it's been the first of one.
Ordinarily, we don't do a plot synopsis of the movies that we cover because they're more widely seen. But since it's June's Exploitation and people are kind of using this month as an avenue for discovery, I figured we'd summarize kind of what the Hunchback of the Morgue is all about so people have some context. So I will read
Yeah.
this brief summary. It is from Joseph at AOL.com. This is straight from IMDb because there
Legend.
was no official plot summary of this, but he did a pretty good job summarizing. So he says Paul Naschy plays a hunchback with below average intelligence who works at the morgue. He is in love with a sickly girl who happens to be the only person who is kind to him. Each day he brings her flowers until the day she dies. He never really accepts her death and believes she is just sleeping. The girl eventually ends up at the morgue where she is prepared for burial. Naschy's character flips out at the desecration of the girl's body and stabs and decapitates the men in the only scene of gore in the movie, which I don't know about that. The police begin to look for him. This is when the hunchback meets up with a mad scientist whose work isn't accepted by the general society. The scientist promises the hunchback that he would reanimate the girl's body if the hunchback brings him fresh body parts from the graveyard and live victims. He uses the parts to create a monster. I was more interested in the setup of the movie and disappointed when it evolved into something more than just his infatuation with this girl who died and his kind of yearning to bring her back. I think once it kind of evolves into like there's a new woman who inexplicably is into the lead character, and then we've got like the mad scientist creating his monster and stuff like that. It kind of, not that it didn't feel of a piece, but it just sort of wasn't. I was disappointed because it wasn't as interesting as the initial setup.
I myself found it quite interesting past that point. I was good with the amount of yearning that Goto had towards Ilsa. I thought that was enough because I
Yeah.
see the whole piece as like a telenovela, you know. It was this kind of heightened Spanish soap opera that decides it's going to go all in. And my ears perk up a little more when the movie is willing to throw, you know, shit at it, because it's not, you know, it's never going in the Criterion collection or, you know,
Hey,
MoMA.
these days.
Adam, I perfectly see what you're saying though about that relationship, because it is probably, it's very earnest, and it's well played by the two of them, and it's sweet. It's got a simple kind of sweetness to it that kind of elevates the material, you know, when he's not busy hacking mannequins
Mm-hmm.
heads off and arms off. He's quite a sweet character, and I think, but just again, only this being the only Naschy that I've seen, but I'm already seeing an actor that has a lot of charisma and has a lot of empathy, and can turn that into, you know, he can turn that into that elevated rage when he needs to. I believe that he could kick the shit out of all these people when Goto goes into one of his fits. You
Yeah.
know, I really do.
Overall, it wasn't my favorite, but I do think that there is some charm to this, from the perspective of the performance and all that. I think I would be at the very least, this movie did not dissuade me from checking out more Paul Naschy and seeing if there's performances where he's not so committed to one style of performance, where he kind of has to
Yeah.
play this kind
Yeah.
of like, this person who's a little bit of, a low status character. I'd love to see a little bit more of just what he's able to do range wise. But
Mhm.
I think this is an interesting challenge for an actor and just a really fun kind of genre piece.
Yeah, they described him in some of the stuff I was reading as like Spain's answer to Lon Chaney.
Which
So
you can
that's,
see he's kind of
yeah,
going for, like you can
yeah,
see kind of very much aware of that reputation. I don't know how far into his career this was. I don't really know much about the timeline of his career.
yeah.
You can definitely tell that he comes in with a certain amount of recognition into this and maybe knows what the audience expects of him.
I think he's Spain's answer to Eugene Levy in 3D House of Pancakes from STV.
I'm curious to see also with Paul Naschy movies, because like we all kind of agreed. I think if we I know that I'm recommending this movie because it made me want to seek out at least one more of his to see kind of where I sit with more of his work. But I found it interesting that he kind of is mixing the gore of Herschel Gordon Lewis with kind of the set dressing of a Hammer movie and the plot of a Universal Monster programmer movie
Right.
from like the 40s. I thought that was really interesting. And I couldn't really sense like, were they shooting this to, was this supposed to be in Germany? Because it had like a lot of callbacks to like messy
It
drunkards
was it
and
was
Bavaria
filmed in Austria. Yeah,
in Austria. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Because it's like this clearly like this Austrian village with Hofbrauhauses. And I think one of my favorite things, just as far as ephemera of the movie, is just how oversized the beers are, and like you can't escape drinking one without having half of it on your sweater. And they're meaner to Naschy than the girls in the WNBA are mean to Caitlin Clark.
One of the
Yeah,
first names he's called by one of these guys is Fart Face.
Hmm.
yeah.
You
Well,
know, and constantly idiots. Oh, these are all names that, like, my grandkids, if I say them, I get like yelled at by them. but again, that's all part of the enjoyment for me because it's so clear in its, in its literary sources, and its, as you said, its monster sources.
Mhm.
Uh, it's just simple fun.
Yeah.
It's just a simple man and his hump and his love for a doctor and her love for him.
I thought it was funny that at one of those scenes where the medical students were hazing him or beating him up or, just shouting at him, that they did a cutaway to Rodney Dangerfield and he goes, I thought I got no respect.
Right.
As someone who's more of an expert on the world of B movie schlock, what are the other sort of canon Paul Naschy movies that we should definitely check out? I know you haven't seen them, but do you have like in your head like a
There's a El Hombro de Lobo. Thank
okay?
you for the Spanish lessons,
Yeah,
grade
well,
six.
well done, well done.
That could be very wrong. He did a series of movies as a werewolf hero.
Mhm. Yeah.
He also did a vampire series as well. Both of those, I think the werewolf one is a little more well known. Um, and those are apparently, worth seeking out in the same way that one would seek out, the Christopher Lee
Right.
Draculas or something like that. Naschy kind of has a reputation for those.
I also really liked not so much when you finally see the monster at the end, it wasn't so much the
Yeah,
design because he was just sort of like a mud creature, but
Sitar Man from Return
Starman.
of the Living Dead.
yeah, yeah. But I thought it would whoever decided on the sound design for him did a hell of a job because like leading up to seeing him and getting that reveal, you just hear him and
Yeah.
it is chilling. And I thought it was so great. It's just this gurgly, shrieking scream. And yeah, it's always kind of like, is your monster as compelling as what the monster behind the door? And it's like
Right?
the monster behind the door in this one is very, very compelling.
Yeah.
And there's something so fun, just this being the first, week of June exploitation, when you're watching, you seeing a set that is sort of
Oh,
half dungeon, half laboratory. You've got like 50s, buttons and nozzles and dials.
the
You've got
beakers
like
are
a
bubbling.
and then you're just like, this is great. Like, that set was like 6 feet by 8 feet, and they literally the frame fit in just enough. They couldn't actually show anything outside of that because that's all the space they had. And that's June exploitation. That's what June exploitation is all about. That's the beauty of it.
You have an acid pit,
An acid pit. We were talking
which
about Mortal Kombat last time about pits with spikes, pits with
Mm,
acid.
yeah, but why not make it more of a circle? That's all I'm gonna say. I don't like the rectangle.
more like a jacuzzi.
An
It's
acid
like a
jacuzzi.
bed. It's like a bed.
It is
It's
like a
just
bed.
like, yeah, I guess I'll just roll in the acid.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I do want to give one caveat though. I might be oversensitive, but something that bothered me, especially after I read the IMDb trivia as I
Yes,
was
I know what
watching
you're gonna.
this.
Yeah,
Uh,
If
yeah.
you do not want to see violence against animals,
Mhm.
you might want to skip this one because there's some stuff done with rats, and apparently some rats really died in the scenes that they were using them.
Right.
And it's something I don't condone. It's something that uh, is why I can never watch Cannibal Holocaust ever again. I mean, so I do want to just give a kind of warning on that one. It's interesting. Like I can understand why Paul Naschy has such a following, and
Oh,
if any of our watcher of our viewers are watchers,
our watchers.
this is sponsored by the Watchers, opening
Watcher
June 7th.
out this week. Yeah.
Um, if any of our viewers are Naschy fans and have recommendations for us,
Yes.
please leave a
Definitely.
comment. We would love to know like what are the top ones, the ones that we absolutely are must sees. And before we wrap up and introduce what we're going to watch next week, I want to throw it back to Scott because
yes,
Scott,
sir.
uh, please tell everybody watching about your book and where we can
Mhm.
find the book.
The book is A Cut Below, a celebration of B horror movies, 1950s to 1980s. It came out in February from McFarland Publishing. You can get it wherever fine books are sold, and you know, and shitty ones too. Yeah, I hope people dig it. It's people seem to be enjoying it so far, so I hope that ride continues.
Well, you're
So
kind enough to give us copies. I'm excited to read it. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
my pleasure.
Yeah, I think we're planning on meeting at like an Austrian ale house and reading the book and
Totally.
spilling beer all over our shirts.
That's probably wise.
Yeah. I'm not a big beer guy, but I will be digging the acid pit.
So we're gonna be back next week with celebrating Ozploitation.
Yes, man.
And we'll watch Russell Mulcahy's Razorback.
Hmm.
And until next time.
Oh shit, hold on. Wait, I had something. I just used the acid pit joke, though. I can't use the acid pit joke. I don't know. Scott, stall for me. Say something. Make something up. No.
Happy June exploitation, everybody.
Until next time, happy June exploitation.